I think it's a mistake to get involved in the Syrian civil war. And what I would ask John Kerry is, he's famous for saying, how can you ask a man to be the last one to die for a mistake? I would ask John Kerry, how can you ask a man to be the first one to die for a mistake?
Welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. Hope everybody had a good Labor Day. That was Senator Rand Paul making the case for non-intervention in Syria's civil war. Global View columnist Bret Stephens is here to make the opposite case. Bret, welcome.
Good to be here. That was one first-class piece of demagoguery you heard from Rand Paul.
So what is the opposite case to Senator Rand Paul? Because his point is that there's a civil war. It's going to keep going on. Why do you want to put U.S. troops on the line?
Look, let me ask you, do we want Assad to win? Do we want Hezbollah to win? Do we want Iran to consolidate its position in the Middle East? Do we want Vladimir Putin to have a new client in the Middle East, just as the Soviet Union had Syria as a reliable client in the Middle East? People who are arguing against this intervention need to make a clear case why they are okay with the idea of Assad remaining in power. And by the way, do we really want, I know Barack Obama is certainly on this editorial page no one's idea of the best president we've ever had, okay? But do we want the president to have his authority, his executive authority, and future presidents' executive authority being undercut by this false constitutional argument that somehow the president needs to go and ask for Congress's permission for any kind of military intervention? I'm sorry to go on here. For 30 years, Republicans fought acts like the War Powers Act, which were meant to constrain presidential authority. When Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada, he did not consult a single member of Congress. Is Rand Paul going to say Ronald Reagan should have been impeached for that unconstitutional
Well, look, Bret, there are a lot of strands of argument there. I want to focus, let's focus first on the president. Yeah. There was a Wall Street Journal news story today that said President Obama hasn't even followed through on his promise to arm the rebels. So why should we trust that this president is, if he does go into Syria, will follow through?
Right, and that is a legitimate question. We have a very shaky commander-in-chief who has allowed one red line after another to be ignored, erased, removed, and that is a real issue. But now what is at issue is whether we are going to have a Congress essentially issue a no-confidence vote in presidential authority when we have a real issue on the line. Does Bashar Assad take the signal that he used chemical weapons, okay, in violation of law and in violation of American will, and got away with it with the consent of the American Congress? That is a dangerous message to be sending, not just Bashar Assad, but every other two-bit thug who is looking at whether the United States is going to police world order or withdraw from that role.
If you looked, though, at the region prior to this use of chemical weapons, Bashar al-Assad, nominally a friend of the United States, but not really, a lot of Iranian influence there. Let's say we let him stay in power. Iran's influence, how is it increased, Bret? They had influence over the region before.
Yes, except that this time they have won. They have defied the United States. They have defied the international community. They have defied an effort by the Sunni Arab world to overthrow a minoritarian dictatorship, and they have won. And they are already on the cusp of having the ability to produce nuclear weapons, not in small numbers, but in large numbers. They're creating an industrial scale nuclear capability. By the way, whatever influence we have remaining in Iraq, and this is largely Obama's fault that we squandered the gains that we made in Iraq, Iraq will understand that it now exists as part of an arc in a Shiite crescent, and it will increasingly come under Iranian sway. So even that limited gain, which however much of it was squandered, is going to be eroded completely if we allow that.
Less than 30 seconds left. What does it mean for Israel if people like Senator Rand Paul and his argument prevails?
Well, it means that Israel will now understand, will take the lesson that when the United States and this president says, I will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, he doesn't really mean it, or he's going to consult Congress, or the United States is going to chicken out one way or the other. And that is going to be an incentive for Israel to take a highly risky unilateral strike to deal with the Iranian nuclear problem, because the United States won't. That is a likelier source of a serious regional conflict than America acting. So Israel is taking the lesson that the United States is an unreliable ally, and by the way, so is Taiwan, South Korea, and every other country that relies on us for security.
Okay, Global View columnist Bret Stephens, thank you so much for your comments.
By doing so, you announce in advance that your goal is not winning.
But that's not.
And I think the last 50 years of secretaries of defense would say,
Senator,
if your goal is not to win, you shouldn't be
do
involved.
you want to go to war in Syria? Of course not. Everybody, 100% of Americans will say no. We say no. We don't want to go to war in Syria either. It's not what we're here to ask. The president is not asking you to go to war. He's not asking you to declare war. He's not asking you to send one American troop to war. He's simply saying we need to take an action that can degrade the capacity of a man who's been willing to kill his own people by breaking a nearly 100-year-old prohibition. And will we stand up and be counted to say we won't do that?
Welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. That was a very testy exchange yesterday between Secretary of State John Kerry and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul on the merits of intervening in Syria. Yesterday, our Bret Stephens made the case for intervention, and today we've got American Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow John Bolton here to make the opposite case. Welcome, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you.
Are you against any kind of intervention or just the kind of intervention that Secretary of State Kerry was describing?
Well, that exchange you just played is a little bit like the Syrian civil war to me. Neither side is acceptable. Look, the fact is we don't know what intervention President Obama is actually proposing, and I think that's a big part of the problem. He says that he wants to vindicate his drawing of a red line, but he also talks about his intervention being proportionate and limited. And if that's in fact what he does, he will not establish conditions of deterrence. He will not persuade Assad, or more importantly, the regime in Tehran, to give up their nuclear weapons program. So in that sense, I'm very worried that because it goes beyond the loss of credibility the president has already experienced, given March's evidence of the use of chemical weapons by Assad, it will implicate the entire United States. And I think a limited response will simply tell Iran that it's got essentially free sailing toward nuclear weapons.
But if the U.S. doesn't respond in a limited way or in the way that you might prefer, a stronger kind of intervention, what message does that send to U.S. allies like Israel in the region?
It sends a message that we have a president whose word you can't trust. But I don't buy the argument that the president is the equivalent of the United States. I do not buy it. The president that sits behind the desk in the Oval Office is not a cardboard cutout. It's a flesh and blood person. And when the flesh and blood person changes, the message that comes out of the Oval Office changes. When Ronald Reagan replaced Jimmy Carter, it may not have been night and day, but it was pretty close. And the same is true in the case of whoever replaces Obama.
Okay, but we still have several years left of the second term of the Obama administration. Global View columnist Bret Stephens was on the show yesterday, and he argued we don't have time to wait here, and in fact that Israeli action against Iran is more likely if we don't intervene. So again, I ask you, why would you not support what the president is asking for?
I think the Israelis should strike Iran's nuclear weapons program, whether we intervene in Syria or not. There's no way that Obama is going to use force against Iran, and a weak response here or no response gives the Iranians exactly the same message. I'm deeply worried about the next 3.5 years. I didn't vote for Obama in large measure for that reason, but the American people did. And you know the saying, you get the government you deserve. So we've got 1,200 days of danger. That's a fact.
That is a fact. Iran's influence is also extending from Tehran now potentially to the Mediterranean. Again, doesn't that argue for U.S. intervention now?
But if the intervention is weak, it will send the wrong signal. And every indication is, from the president's own words, which is all the evidence we have at this point, a proportional, limited response will not be enough.
Okay, American Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow and former Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, with the last word. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Mary.